Hey everyone, it's Sleepy Reader, aka Damien, and I am back a little bit later than I'd like to be with my comic book countdown. I got 15 comics this past Wednesday. It's now Tuesday, so the next Wednesday is coming up. But I wanted to do my usual extremely subjective countdown of the comics of my enjoyment of the 14 of the 15 comics I got. The 15th was Thor, which I have not gotten around to reading because I am now about 3 or 4 issues behind on my Thor reading. And I need to dig things up, maybe even more issues behind. I got really screwed up by shortages and comics that there was a run on them and you couldn't find them in the shops. But eventually I got all the Thor issues I need, and I will be reading those. But so I have 14 comics, which is a lot for me. I'm thinking maybe 7 to 9 comics a week is kind of a nice number because there's so much other stuff that I'm reading and focusing on right now. And just life has got lots of stuff going on, despite it being this stay inside the house COVID kind of life. So anyway, this week, except for one comic, I pretty much liked everything, but I also didn't find any of those wow, comics are amazing 5-star comic books that seems like for a while I was getting 2 to 3 of those every week. It feels like somehow in my mix of comics that I've been getting, the excitement level has slowed down for me. And it could be me, it could be the comics, it could be what I'm picking up. I did also, I commented to a friend that it felt like comic book coloring had reached a peak and is now maybe less good overall. And that friend replied that he thought that comic book coloring was better than it has ever been. That it just keeps getting better. And I don't know, so again, that's kind of relative, but I was noticing coloring a lot this week. And I was thinking that the kind of what do I want out of coloring, because it used to be comics coloring was pretty standard, and now it's all over the place, and it's can be very artistic, and it can have a lot of different effects and all of that. And they have millions of colors as their options for colorists instead of the 64 of the classic comics, something like 60. I probably got the numbers wrong, but what I want out of a colorist is a number of things, which pleasing colors that just I enjoy looking at, colors that help tell the story and help bring out certain parts of the art, and colors that just make things look cooler. But that kind of goes with the clarifying effect too. They can't, if they look cool, too cool, but they don't clarify, so there has to be a balance there. Anyway, that coloring was a huge issue for me in my number 14 pick. The only comic I really didn't enjoy reading this week, which is We Only Find Them When They're Dead, which is kind of a shocker because it's written by Al Ewing, who is the writer of one of my favorite comics out sort of month by month, which is The Immortal Hulk. This one is from Boom Comics, and it's drawn by Simone DeMeo, and it's certainly, the colors look cool, like the color choices, I guess, are fun, but the overall effect of the coloring is to destroy the storytelling of this comic. It's nearly impossible to tell what's going on. I often have to search to find the face of the character in the story. And this issue was mostly characters talking while flying in their spaceships. But on top of the coloring being a really huge problem, it was skipping around in time, and even though it was tagged and I would flip back pages and say, oh, this is 3 years before, that's now, but it still felt like even when it wasn't tagged as a time jump, I was like, wait a minute, in what time is this conversation taking place and that conversation. And so ultimately it feels like this comic is being ruined on the writing front and the art front, although much bigger on the art front. And the line artist is also the colorist. And maybe this stuff looks really cool on his computer screen. Maybe he's learning about coloring as he goes along, so that he's discovering some really cool tricks, but he's also missing out on some important parts of the process. Or maybe he is, like, for instance, I think on top of the colors kind of obscuring things, I think he's using all kinds of blurring effects and other things that kind of ironically flatten out the drawings and make the drawings disappear underneath the color. I don't fully know all the technology or anything, but then the writing is taking what should be a very exciting idea and also making it kind of obscure. Like, okay, they find dead gods floating in space, and our heroes want to go look for living gods, but what's that based on? Why do they think by flying in a certain direction they're going to find the living gods, or any of that? And these conflicts that they have with people in some kind of like space patrol. What are those conflicts exactly? But man, I got to the point where I was shining a flashlight on these, I guess I was reading at night, and I had all the lights on in my room, but I was also like trying to find the details in the pictures. So anyway, sadly, this is a drop. I know it's like the best-selling indie comic right now. I think issue 1 is now up to selling like 90,000 copies, or 90,000 copies in print, probably, really, sold to comic book stores. But if other readers are like me, this is going to be flopping very soon. But hopefully other people are enjoying it, and if it starts making a lot of sense in a few issues, I'll be buying the trades if people say that. Or, you know what? Probably I'll be reading it digitally, because at least there the colors will be a little easier to parse. So it's too bad, because it's a cool idea. A kind of disappointment, surprise, but I liked it much better. At number 13 is this sort of one-shot Halloween special on the Swamp Thing. And the concept, I believe, if I understand correctly, there's a framing story by Ram V and with excellent art by Mike Perkins. The concept is, I think, to take the Swamp Thing and almost make him like a host of a series of horror stories. But the iterations of the, not really the Swamp Thing, but the representative of the green, I forget what they call it, the avatar of the green, I'm not sure, throughout history in different places and times, is the horror MacGuffin in each story. We get ancient Rome, and we get what are some of the other areas? We get somewhere in Latin America. I'm not sure when and where, but relatively modern times. But some colonial African, Latin American kind of situation. We also get World War II with a Japanese soldier not knowing the war's over on an island. But somehow all the stories they felt kind of lifeless to me. There was some cool art, but they lacked a zing. I just sort of had higher hopes. And I also felt a little frustrated in the uses, the stretching of the mythos of the Swamp Thing, of the Parliament of Trees and the Avatar of the Green. It just didn't work quite click for me. Lots of excellent art, but none of the stories really hit me in the right way. So I ranked it at number 13. Very dark coloring there too. I'm not, I like the line art. I'm not sure how I feel about the color art. It looks good at first, but does it help me read the story that well? So anyway, interesting. Whenever Swamp Thing comes out, I get excited. I am a fan of that character, and of a lot of the past work. But then I started thinking, reading that comic, how many stories can you tell with the Swamp Thing? Is it kind of got the writers stuck in a bind where there's only so much you can do with it? You can play with that, mythos that Alan Moore overlaid onto the Swamp Thing with the Parliament of the Trees and the avatars of the green and the red and all that. But it makes it harder maybe for a character-based story ultimately. In at number 12 is this Archie one-shot. I've been buying lots of these Archie one-shots. They're always $2.99, especially the Veronica and Betty and Veronica one-shots, which seem to come out every few months. And usually have been a lot of fun to read with my daughter. I read this one on my own. I feel like this Halloween one is a lesser of those one-shots. It's still fun, but it doesn't click as much as I would have liked it. The best story is, as often is the case, the one by Dan Parent. There's less Dan Parent in this issue, so maybe that was part of the problem. They also went for longer stories for them. Like this one was 12 pages long, whereas they usually in these one-shots give us like 4 or 5 page stories. Anyway, so I still enjoyed it, but it's lower in the Archie ranking for me. And I normally have not included the Archies in these comic book countdowns, but I just figured I would do it this time because I read it on my own and I read it within the time that I read all these others. Okay, and then in at a number 11 is this latest issue of The Creeps, which has a really cool cover. And I find myself, I guess, every other month or whenever it comes out, really looking forward to The Creeps and the black and white art and the slightly silly twist, horror stories with a twist ending. But I felt like this issue was flatter. They're always a bit flat, and they're shallow stories. They're short, and they're aimed at the ending. But the flatness and the lack of any kind of nuance or any kind of interesting character notes or follow-up on any hint of interesting character notes kind of left me a bit flat this issue. But I did love particularly the art in this this story, which was interestingly about a comic book publisher or editor who drives his writer to suicide, and then the writer comes back and rips the heart out of his body. The artist is named Renaud Manquis, but he has very pleasing art. There's another artist who shows up in almost every issue that reminds me of old John Buscema art, Benito Gallego. I really think someone in mainstream comics should jump on him and have him see what he can do with Conan or superheroes or something. I know this kind of art is out of fashion, but I really like it. But I would love to see him teamed up with a better writer. My favorite story was this one called House. But even this one, I wished it had just a little more in the writing, edges and details and nuances of some kind. But it's basically about a house that people who've committed crimes end up finding this house and then getting trapped in it, become one of the trapped souls in there. Interestingly, the art is by Paul McCaffrey, and he did the art in another comic coming up, and I liked this black and white art of his a lot. So if you miss that old style black and white art, I mean, it's not up to the best of Creepy and Eerie for sure, or of the Marvel black and whites of the day of the 70s, but it still has enough there that I kind of feel satisfied on that level. In at number 10 for me was issue 2 of Inkblot. I loved issue 1, and issue 2 just maybe there's something I forgot about issue 1, but I think we jumped kind of to another story, that we weren't getting the continuation of what happened at the end of issue 1. I'll have to go back and check, but that was my feeling. So I felt a little bit on shaky ground. But maybe this is going to be a tapestry of stories about people who have experience with this black cat, that will eventually build up to more, because they obviously are connected. I can't remember the names of like there's a group of people who are kind of immortal and travel from world to world and have magical and build up more and more magical powers as they go. And one of those people was the protagonist in that first issue. And in this issue, it's the protagonists are some elf-like people in one of the worlds that those people are passing through. I don't remember disliking the color of the first one, issue 1, but I really had troubles. The color just sort of turned me off in many of these pages. It's not all bad, but maybe because I was already kind of tuned into what I like and don't like about coloring. It didn't hurt the storytelling too much, so maybe it was just on the aesthetic level of, these colors aren't really super appealing to me. And it's weird because they're very close to colors that would appeal to me, but somehow the balance isn't quite right. I presume, it doesn't say, so this is created by two people, Emma Kubert, and who apparently is a granddaughter of Joe Kubert, and Rusty Glad. And my understanding from the back matter is they come up with a brief idea of what the story is going to be about for the issue. Then Emma pencils it, sort of Marvel style, making up the plot as she goes, penciling. And then Rusty comes back and puts in the dialogue like Stan Lee used to do, and then inks it. And I don't think it said who colors it, but I think one or the other of them colors it. It says here, I add a touch of grit to her whimsy in the inks, but her inherent storytelling ability is what allows me to find voices for all our characters so easy in the end. How does she do it? How does she lay out 20 pages from one sentence on a Post-it note? How do I end up writing dialogue for characters who are birthed before my eyes? And above all, how is it that we have so much fun while we do it? So he doesn't mention who did the coloring. But, if they're just early in their experiences coloring, I could definitely see this coloring getting better and working better as you go along. I guess there are some of these pages where the color seems to, like in this panel up here, make it harder to see what's going on in the panel. And I like that that this is a bit of a free-form collaboration, and I'm definitely going to keep getting Inkblot, but I did like the first issue quite a bit better. So that was number 10. At number 9 was Firepower. A perfectly good read, extremely well colored, by Matthew Wilson, who does generally, he is one of those ideal colorists who does give you colors that are enjoyable to look at and that work with the storytelling. Kind of in keeping with the fact that this was not a very exciting story, the colors aren't quite so exciting. Except, here and there's kind of, I don't know if it's a flashback or a different scene of the world of the temple where he was trained, but the rest of the kind of colors in the real world of his are a bit more muted, but still interesting. Matthew Wilson keeps it interesting. There's only one comic on which I don't like Matthew Wilson's coloring, which is Undiscovered Country. But this, I still have failed to read the prequel graphic novel, which I hear is really great, and I own a copy of it. I just haven't read it. But these 4 issues still haven't given me a sense of this comic rising above any sort of kung fu and action movie cliches that you kind of can see everything coming so far, which is not a bad thing. It's just not going to make it a standout wow comic. It can be like a 3.5 stars kind of comic all along, and I'll keep reading it. I think the only caveat there is I'm so excited to have Chris Samney and Matthew Wilson working on a comic. If it's just going to be kind of one of Robert Kirkman, the writer's more, less standout comics, it's just kind of a shame that the art team isn't on something more exciting. But still, a worthy comic to read. And in at number 8 was Adler, which is that artist that I pointed out in the Black and White magazine, Paul McCaffrey, with Lavi Tildar, the writer. And I've been loving Adler. This is issue 4, and this issue felt rushed, and the writing just felt different. It's hard to put your finger on it. So I still enjoyed it, but it was not as enjoyable and meaty of an issue as normal. It feels like suddenly we're just going to have a big action scenes to kind of wrap things up. And there were a few things that weren't entirely clear to me in the fight scene and how it resolves and some other aspects of things. So again, that feels a little more rushed. I mean, I eventually could figure out, the fight stopped here because these men with guns must have been employees of Lady Haversham. And so then the Amazons who were attacking our female heroines stopped their attack, and it was kind of one of those draws right here. But it took some work to figure out. So I hope this keeps going for a while. I hope that they're not trying to wrap it up next issue, which could be, let me see, does it say to be concluded by any chance? It just says end of part 4 at the end. They do have a nice kind of from script to drawing. So this one, the problem again, and it has been all along, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the art, which now that I realize I really liked this guy's art in its black and white form in a horror story, I wish this was in black and white, but the artist, McCaffrey, is doing his own coloring, and it's both unappealing to my eye, and it feels like it detracts from the qualities of the line art to some degree, where the color overwhelms the line art, so that often you just see the color version of things, if you will, and not the clarity of the line art. I mean, it's not totally horrible, and there's even a teeny bit of a Richard Corbin vibe in the way the colors are used. But overall, somehow, it just doesn't work for me in terms of the coloring. So this is the kind of thing that I kind of need to wait till it wraps up to say whether you should read it or not. But I'm certainly still enjoying it quite a bit. Another one I enjoyed a lot, I put in at number 7, is Norse Mythology. But with a caveat, so this one is kind of a perfection of line art and color. And most of the color was being done by, I'm going to get his name totally wrong, Lovern Kindersky. And I know I used to see his colors more often. And I don't know if he's in semi-retirement or, people at DC and other places where I used to see his colors are not asking him to color comics anymore. If that's the case, they should, because they're missing out on an awesome, awesome colorist. And, because he does, and I found out he was a he, I wasn't sure at one point, but he does colors that are pleasing to the eye, that always help clarify what's going on the page and in the panel, and always help you appreciate the line art rather than distract from it. The middle story he did not color, but this story he also colored. And it looks a little different. He took a different approach, a different palette, so to speak, I guess you'd say, for a different story. This one about Loki and dwarves and Thor. So I love Norse mythology, delightful art. It's adapting a Neil Gaiman book, which I haven't read, which is kind of ideal because I'd rather read one version or the other than read the book and then read the comic of it. But judging from the script part, the storytelling part, it's kind of a flat, less. There's not so much personality in these retellings of the stories. The personality's in the art, and I don't mind that. I'll definitely. My computer went to sleep. I'll definitely keep an eye on this. I haven't decided whether to wait. Whether I picked up this first issue, but whether to collect it in issues or wait for like a really nice hardback, which often is the case of what you'll get from Dark Horse Comics. But so the script has been adapted by P. Craig Russell, and he did the layouts of all of these stories, and then he did the finished art on one of them, and then you get finished. So you get Mike Mignola working over P. Craig Russell's layouts, and they're great layouts. And then you get Jerry Ordway doing peak Jerry Ordway work. I feel like over P. Craig Russell's layouts, and it felt. I mean, as I was reading through, I kind of forgot that there were 3 different artists here. Yes, the style changed with the stories, but it all felt of a piece at the same time, and so it almost just like felt there with the Mignola work that it was Russell. That was Russell just inked slightly differently or something. But then when I go back and look closer, it's very classic Mike Mignola kind of looking stuff. But anyway, so this is a very pleasurable comic. It's weird because it's on very like even the cover stock, it reminds me of a Marvel comic. It's printed on cheaper paper than even some of the other Dark Horse comics I got. So I don't know what that's about. Like this is not Dark Horse, it's Titan, but this has very nice cover stock and firepower even better. Robert Kirkman does on his own books does not stint on paper quality. Let's see, what else have we got here? It's not. The DC book has fairly good cover stock and fairly good paper stock, much more than, for some reason, this Norse Mythology. Maybe are they saving a few pennies on paper on that one so they can pay Neil Gaiman his fee? I don't know. Speaking of Neil Gaiman, sort of, in at number 6 for me was the highly enjoyable The Dreaming Waking Hours. I still am not loving this as much as I thought I would with the first issue. The script from G. Willow Wilson is very good, but I think the first issue gave me heightened expectations that maybe she would do stuff at a even higher level than she is doing, but she's doing a very good job. This one has excellent coloring, actually, and great art, and it's a fun story. I think maybe where it lets me down a little bit, not a lot, but I mean just down from my original expectations, is there's a certain clichéness to the female character, the lead female character, in a number of ways. She had a baby by accident with a guy she picked up at a party. That just seems like a cliche, and some of her other kind of attitudes about things just seem like cliches. But we're still in it's kind of a 2-pronged story, one that takes place with characters from The Dreaming, and the other side of the story is our woman from real life who is trapped in this dream about Shakespeare and who really wrote Shakespeare's plays. So I can't see this storyline unless she adds more complications going on too long. Or maybe it would be great if this is more in the tradition of the original Sandman, where you get a 5 or 6 issue story and then a completely different story that is related to this concept of dreaming and the waking hours. But we'll see. In at number 5 for me was what was probably the big book of the week, Batman 100. It was quite good. I don't think you could pick this up and read it by itself. I think it's so deeply entwined with the kind of web of story around the Joker War that James Tynion has created, that that you kind of need to read the whole thing. But I do, I enjoy it, and yet it probably would have ranked even higher. I mean, everything, I don't know, from number 10 or 9 up has been really good comics, but if it would have ranked even higher for me, I think, if I still am not just sort of burnt out on the Joker. And Tynion kind of plays with, the moral questions that the Joker brings up, especially this modern version of the Joker, who is a enormous serial killer, like not occasionally kills people, but is just constantly killing people and wreaking death everywhere he goes. And why wouldn't you, if you have the opportunity, let him die or kill him? And it just becomes absurd. I mean, generally I'm not for capital punishment, but for the Joker or any criminal at his level, I am totally for capital punishment. And so I have trouble dealing with that aspect of things. And Tynion kind of is asking you to think about it. And that's almost, in the modern Joker world, a cliche too. The issue of whether to kill the Joker or not is sort of becoming part of the whole rigmarole of it. Maybe going back to the Killing Joke, I don't know. And it's an issue that gets me all riled up, but I also feel partially tired of that issue. So it would be kind of nice, in my mind, I know it'll never happen, if somehow they decelerated the Joker and made him a little more subtle of a killer, so that there was some question mark whether you could reform him, or whether, if you put him in Arkham Asylum, he wouldn't just escape and kill another hundreds of people. I mean, you're literally signing the death warrant for hundreds of people by continually putting him back in Arkham. And in this case, the Joker escapes, and there's sort of some epilogue stories where we see that what he's up to. And on top of that, we also have a confrontation between Batman and the kid who is the clown killer. And that kind of sat wrong with me somehow. There's something about the way that played out. You're a killer and you shouldn't be killing, and I'm going to keep my eye on you. And then at the end of that little epilogue story, it said, "To be continued in Batman 101." So that's set up for our next moral conundrum, is Batman versus this guy who kills people, or tries to kill people like the Joker, or who work for the Joker. So James Tynion does a great job, but I really wish he could move on and write about something other than the Joker in Batman. So I'm thinking about whether I want to continue reading the Batman. I probably do. I put it on my pull list. I used to think I could just take it off the rack, but then there were these key issues with the characters that made investors the speculators pick up all the issues, and I had trouble getting a hold of issues. So I put it on my pull list, but I might go back to just not having it on my pull list so that I can pick it up or not pick it up on my whims of the week. Okay, so that was number 5. And number 4 is Spy Island, which I'm really enjoying a lot. The only flaw of this issue was that it, not the only flaw, because I'm just reminded that I don't like the colors too much. But the main flaw is that the story just inched forward. There was a lot of stuff going on, but in a way it was like just one tiny beat of the story. But I'm really enjoying Chelsea Kane's sense of humor here. I feel like the art is quite good. And I thought last issue I liked the coloring, but a lot of the coloring maybe doesn't serve the art as well as it could. I mean, I'm getting really picky about coloring here, so it's probably a bit unfair of me. But the characters are fun. The setting is fun. It's all quirky, and it's familiar enough from like James Bond movies and crime movies to some degree, but then also has all kinds of weird sort of Chelsea Cain's own version of the Bermuda Triangle and the fantasy world where mermaids and other creatures are known to truly, the Kraken, to truly exist. And stuff like this, like fake ads and things that kind of annoyed me in her, what was the book called? Man-Eaters or something like that. Kind of annoyed me in that book. Work really well in this and are really fun to read. And so this is also a Dark Horse book. The cover stock is just slightly better, but it has no ads and way more. Like I think that Neil Gaiman Norse Mythology one had just 20 pages of story. This has like 32 pages of story. It's everything is the story or fake ads going with the story. So this is a real cool book. I think it's only 4 issues. So it might be kind of, in a sense, like a short story that is, or a novelette or something that is spaced out in 4 issues. Because even though very little happens in this issue, it still feels dense and chewy. So it's an interesting mix. And then at number 3, I halfway reading through it, I thought it was going to be my number 1. It was Adventure Man, but from Matt Fraction and the Dodsons. What's his name? Dodson, the man, the penciler. Terry Dodson also does the colors, and he does a very good job coloring. So of course you get the art and everything, but there's a certain kind of flavor to his coloring that's very distinct and semi-monochromatic and kind of leaves the tone like it's pleasing, but then the tone throughout the book feels kind of unchanging. So I found myself curious what the effect of this artwork and story would be with a very different kind of colorist. But that's not really to say a complaint, but there's just something about it. And when we do get like flashbacks to the pulpy world, I guess the coloring changes somewhat, gets a little less monotone, but it's still so restrained that it doesn't give as pulpy a feeling as I wish it could have. But so there were aspects of the story that would lose me here and there. I was still enjoying it, and I'm still tracking the basic story. And it's kind of cool, the explanation of how this pulpy world was real and then got turned into fiction through some magic, in a sense, as a way to save the world from the villain. So I thought that was a really cool concept. And the characters continue to be fun. But there are some moments where the clarity between who's talking about things and who the real world is, and we get from the typeface that we're then looking at the fiction, but is it fiction that one of the characters is reading, or really that is being told to her by this magician character? I still don't remember her name. I loved the opening sequence where she's kind of going down these Manhattan streets and realizing kind of aspects of her newfound pulp hero powers. So anyway, I continue to enjoy it a lot and look forward to more issues. Bang, which finally came out, I don't know, it feels like just a few weeks ago, after such a long hiatus, continues, and I heard someone say that next issue is the last issue, which is going to really bum me out. There's a new colorist on this. I thought that I need to dig up the old issues, but I thought the coloring on this was already good, and it continues with another good colorist, Bill Crabtree. But I felt like I could sense just a slightly different vibe to the book from the slightly different colorist. Although to be sure that I'm not deluding myself, I'd have to go back and look at the previous issues. But this definitely is an example of a kind of coloring that totally, it works on pleasing the eye, it works on telling the story, and it works on enhancing the artwork without covering anything up in the artwork. And I still love the technique of Bang. You do need to read the text. It's a page from the pulpy novel that this character is drawn from, and it really sets the stage. And then in the back, he always has another page from the story that adds something, some aspects, some details to what you just read. I like that back cover too. And this one introduces a very fun kind of detective / ex-spy character who's an old lady. And it really nicely melds the fiction and nonfiction of her. But this feels like, I mean, this is issue 4. It feels like we now need at least 4 more issues of story. So that's my one worry, is that it will not give me all I was hoping for from these first 4 issues if it has to wrap up next issue. But Matt Kindt is a great writer and rarely disappoints. And he's always a writer that surprises you a little bit. That he does not follow cliches. He plays with cliches, because this whole book is playing with adventure novels and mystery novels and all of that, and sort of Philip K. Dick, what is real fiction taking over reality kind of cliches too. So my top 3, it was very hard to choose the 3, but in the end I decided I enjoyed American Ronin the most, even though I had some caveats with that, with my enjoyment of that. This is from AWA Upshot, which I think of as the Axel Alonso's new comic book company. I know that there's plenty of other people involved, but he's the most familiar name behind it to me, because he was the editor and chief at Marvel for quite a long while, and before that I think he was kind of high up at Vertigo. So he brings in I assume it's him bringing in a lot of well-known writers and artists. This one is written by Peter Milligan, which is probably a big part of why it's so good. And it's drawn by ACO. I don't know how to say his name. Colors by, is it David Di Lorenzo? Is that the colorist? The coloring is pretty good. I don't think it's standout coloring in terms of my aesthetics, but it does its job and rarely obscures the art. But maybe occasionally, like compared to the Bill Crabtree coloring, or the coloring in Adventure Man, or the coloring in Batman. In fact, I should have mentioned the coloring in Batman, but because that's very interesting coloring. It's just not quite as aesthetically pleasing. But this is picking fine hairs. This is good coloring. I think so. This is a slightly familiar story in terms of a future where everything is controlled by the big corporations, which is very near future, since it feels like often big corporations control an awful lot already with their lobbyists and influence over politics and just influence over our lives. But the corporations have these ninja assassin type people, and one of them has gone Ronin. I believe that means gone freelance, or not working for a master. And in this case, we presumably in future issues we get more of a backstory of why he's doing it. But he's been specially trained and genetically altered so that he can take biological matter from other people, inject it into himself, and then understand exactly how they think and feel, to improve his abilities as an assassin. But he's using these powers against the corporations and the heads of the corporations. So not, kind of a standard story with a bit of a twist, but it's told extremely well, and it was extremely fun to read. And given that it's Peter Milligan, it did have that subtle Peter Milligan quirkiness, and everything is morally ambiguous, you might say here, but in a way that worked for me well. So my only real caveat, maybe it's a combination of the coloring and the line art, is it's almost too slick. And they have a note from the artist in the back about, having been tired of the endless rush of deadlines. So I assume from that AWA paid him enough so that he could take more time on the artwork. And unfortunately for me, I miss some. I feel that some looseness would have helped this art in some sense. It's too professional, too slick, and I kind of have that sense of the few other AWA comics I have read, that they are very much on the slick side. But still, I enjoyed this comic a lot, and maybe it's symbolic of the fact that it was a good week, but not a great week. It was all good comics, with that one exception. Professionals doing a decent job, but nothing that totally zinged in my head and went, ooh, that hit of comic excitement, which is unfair to always expect that that's going to happen. But still, that's what I want to happen. I think this is another oh my God, 45 minutes already. Yeah. I've been thinking about taking a break from doing the countdowns. I don't know, maybe just focusing on one or two comics that I really liked and doing shorter videos. We'll see. Talk to you guys sooner than later, no doubt. Bye-bye.